statistical percent that's could flood it every 100 years. And again, I don't know the exact science behind it, but I've read it before, and it's not that it is every 100 years, but there's a probability that it could happen, and that's what it's based upon.
Yeah, the probability means it could be, basically, my understanding of what it says, anywhere between now and the next 100 years. It could be either be over 100 years, it could be 20 years, it could be next year. So it's just, as you said, a statistical
Probability.
Probability, thank you.
Right,
May never happen, but then again.
Right.
And we've also been told by the experts that where this is located, by raising it 2 feet, where it would be hundreds of thousands of acres that would have to be flooded just to raise it 6 inches. I mean, it's just because we're near the Ohio. It's even if it's at a 100-year flood, even 2 feet above, it's a significant amount of space that has to cover because of the topography of the valley that we're in. So even if you get that 100-year flood, there's a good chance it's not going to come up to it. Again, I'd like you to repeat why the wells were moved.
Why the wells?
Because that's been something that people have brought up.
Sure.
Fear of contamination and something being covered up.
Sure. As far as a drinking water public entity goes, we're entrusted to provide clean drinking water and also for the community now and into the future. So the wells were threatened by having that contamination out on the island. They were never impacted based on the data that we've seen. But with that regards, though, moving forward and into the future, if we would have continued there, we were basically restricted from providing any, like if Cleves would have expanded or Hooven would have expanded, or if we would have provided water services somewhere else, and we needed to put in another well, we were not allowed to under the EPA. They would not allow us to do that. So with that, we went to Chevron and said, hey, you've restricted our capacity to provide for this community. You need to help us out, and they did.
Would you also say because that was the water, that's one of the most well-documented pieces of property in our district?
Yes, it was. Also, with regards to that, from operating or starting its operations in 1950 and going all the way up to 2001, it was very restricted on what you could do at that property besides just pump water. So there were some farmers there that provided, grew some corn or something along those lines that were allowed to. But other than that, any other type of, I know there was talks of sand and gravel mines in the area or mining that cannot be done due to the restricted nature because we were providing clean water to the community.
And then also again with the oil tanks or the fuel tanks, those are on the far end of the property where the bus garage would be. You're not concerned about any in-ground tanks. I think you said a couple feet of scooping the dirt out and the oil staining was taken care of.
Correct.
So that's just
above ground tanks. When we did our site visit, typically when you look for underground storage tanks, they have characteristics of fill ports, vent pipes, to take care of the volatility of the constituents there. So we didn't see any of that. We talked to the owner; he had no knowledge of that.
And you're thinking that's like a day project kind of thing, clean up that area.
Yeah, typically it's a 1 to 2 day project.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I asked the question also on fly ash. Is there fly ash on the 42-acre property, and is that an issue?
Fly ash. We looked at the well logs that we had for the wells, and the production wells we have, just native soils to about 15 feet, and that's a mixture of silts and clays, and then it went right into a clean sand and gravel all the way down to 90 feet. Given that the property was made for water, nobody could bring in any types of materials like fly ash to dump on that. So when you look at the topography or the historical topographs over that 50-year span in the database, it shows that the topography was very consistent. So no filling was occurring during that time.
We did not observe any in any of the. It's a very distinctive looking material. We did not see any in any of the borings that we drilled. There was none observed in all of the geotechnical borings that were done by Thielen and Associates. We reviewed all of those logs, and there was no indications of it in any of the chemical testing that we performed.
I was asked a question by a resident about the possible contamination from sites upstream like Fernald and other plants in Hamilton. Is there any risk of any of that stuff coming down the river and contaminating our site?
With regards to the Fernald facility, that was under very high scrutiny. It was actually a Superfund site and probably one of the top Superfund sites in the country. So it had federal agencies monitoring that. It also had the Department of Defense monitor that, since it was nuclear in nature with regards to the contamination. So, you know, they controlled that, and actually it is now a nature preserve. So they've finished their program, and due to their, I don't know what the operations and maintenance are or what type of monitoring is, but, you know, indications are that, you know, they've controlled the contamination that was up there, and, you know, the likelihood of it traveling 10 miles downstream is very slim.
What about some of the factories that are in some, I mean, this particular resident was concerned about International Paper and some of the other, and the steel plant that are further up the river?
Typically, those kind of impacts would only reach a property, you know, the potential school site or any others, the, you know, residential neighborhoods all around there, via the groundwater.
Okay.
And the only chemicals that would affect, you know, groundwaters down very deep in the ground, you know, potential future houses or commercial buildings or a school or anything, are things that could volatilize up through the soil and into a future building. You know, those kind of volatile chemicals were part of the suite of testing that Chevron had been doing for many years, that the Waterworks was required to do for many years, and as Jim has stated, there were never any detections of those kind of chemicals in the wells, the city operated or the monitoring wells that Chevron had put in to demonstrate that the wells were indeed protected.
So they have not been contaminated by anything upstream as far as you're aware?
That's correct.
Thanks.
Talk a little bit about how you select your boring sites and the protocol you use to pick those sites.
Okay, we bias those locations where we think there's the most likely potential for contamination to exist. Samples were selected where we saw the petroleum staining. And then, you know, as far as the fill, we researched the historical aerial photographs. We saw where the fill had gone. We reviewed the geotechnical logs to see where the fill was the thickest. It was fairly consistent across the property as far as the grading had been. So then it really came down to, you know, spacing them out with really a focus on the footprint of the building, since that's where the highest occupancy would be. So the borings that we did were focused mainly on where we understand the footprint of the potential school building would be. And within that, if we would see anything in the field in terms of something unusual, you know, a stain, an unusual, you know, color or something, a piece of junk, you know, we would move the location close to that. We really didn't see those things in the field, to my knowledge. It was just dirt.
Right.
So.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? If there's none, then thank you very much,
Thank
gentlemen.
you.
We appreciate your time and
Thank you
appreciate
very
presenting
much.
this
Thank
evening.
you.
Thank you very much.
I will excuse myself if that's okay. Thank you.
Great. Up next, we have new and revised board policies with Dr. Bohannon.
Okay, thank you.